Okay, let's dive right into this. Picture this. A guy walking across the vast, super rugged landscapes of India, logging over 10,000 miles entirely on foot. And he wasn't doing it just for the exercise or to explore. He was out there to collect 4 million acres of land from the wealthy just to turn around and give it to the absolute poorest people in the country. And the craziest part? He pulled off this massive wealth redistribution without firing a single shot. No legal mandates, no force, just the sheer power of human persuasion. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking the life, the mission, and honestly, the pretty complex legacy of Acharya Vinoba Bhave. To figure out how one man inspired such a massive voluntary transfer of wealth, here's our roadmap. Section 1 covers the early spiritual seeker. Section 2 looks at the disciple and freedom fighter. Section 3 dives into his massive Bhoodan lands movement, followed by Section 4, changing hearts in Chambal. In Section 5, we'll impartially break down the criticisms and modern controversies to get a fully balanced picture. And finally, Section 6 will wrap it all up with a 5-point legacy summary. All right, starting with Section 1, the early spiritual seeker, balancing math and devotion. Let's see where he started. He was born Vinayak Narahari Bhave back in 1895 in the village of Gogode, Maharashtra. And his life path? Definitely not your standard route. In 1916, get this, he's literally on a train heading to Mumbai for his college exams, and he just experiences this massive internal conflict. He physically gets off the train at Surat, tosses his academic certificates straight into a fire, and eventually makes his way to Mahatma Gandhi's ashram. He'd read a speech by Gandhi and realized, okay, this is it, the perfect blend of spiritual peace and revolutionary fire. Fast forward to 1940, and Gandhi trusted him so completely that he picked Vinoba over literally everyone else to be the first individual satyagrahi, meaning the very first person to offer civil disobedience against British rule. But to really understand how his brain worked, you have to look at his parents. His dad was this intense rationalist, all about math and logic. His mom, on the other hand, was deeply, profoundly religious. And there's this amazing story that hits the nail on the head. His mom took a spiritual vow to donate 100,000 grains of rice, counting them out individually over a whole month. His dad, being the logic guy, was like, why don't you just count a handful, weigh it, and use math to figure out the rest? Saves a ton of time, right? But young Vinoba actually backed up his mom. He argued that the physical act of counting, saying a mantra with every single grain, wasn't just arithmetic, it was a spiritual meditation. And that right there, that exact synthesis of strict logical discipline with deep spiritual devotion, kind of became the blueprint for his entire life. Moving on to Section 2, the disciple and freedom fighter, becoming Gandhi's spiritual successor. Once at Gandhi's ashram, Vinoba went all in on the ideology of Sarvodaya, which basically means the welfare of all. He also took a lifelong vow of brahmacharya, meaning absolute celibacy and asceticism, but he took it to an extreme that is frankly hard to wrap your head around. To truly connect with the absolute poorest laborers in the country, specifically women who spun yarn for a living, he adopted their exact economic reality. He would spin yarn for 8 hours a day. The standard wage for that grueling work? Just 10 pies. That's a tiny, tiny fraction of currency. So he made a strict rule for himself. His daily food could not cost more than what 10 pies could buy. It was this staggering, mind-bending level of self-discipline that left even Gandhi's own family completely in awe. And that intense dedication wasn't just physical, it was intellectual too. Because he was so active in the freedom struggle, Vinoba spent years locked up in British prisons. But he didn't just sit there. He used that time to master multiple languages and write a prolific amount of literature. A really touching detail is that he remembered his mom couldn't read Sanskrit. So, what does he do? He translates the Bhagavad Gita into simple Marathi, calling it Gita or Mother Gita. It was a real game changer because it made this incredibly profound spiritual text totally accessible to millions of everyday people. Okay, Section 3, the Bhoodan land movement, the bloodless revolution of 1951. This is where things get truly historic. 4 million acres. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is an astonishing amount of land. So how did this happen? Well, in 1951, he was in a village called Pochampally, which was being torn apart by violent land disputes. 40 landless Dalit families came up to him and begged for just 80 acres of land so they could literally survive. Now, Vinoba didn't petition the government. Instead, he just turned to the local landlords who were gathered right there and simply asked, hey, would anyone be willing to share their wealth? And against all odds, a man stood up and just offered 100 acres. Taking this as a huge divine sign, Vinoba launched Bhoodan, the land gift movement. He literally walked from village to village for over 13 years across India. He'd ask people to treat him like an extra son and donate a share of their land to him, which he then turned around and gave to the poor. It was this massive, bloodless, voluntary revolution of wealth redistribution on a scale the world had rarely seen. Up next, Section 4, Changing Hearts in Chambal, Confronting the Dacoits in 1960. Vinoba believed so absolutely in the inherent goodness of people that in 1960, he walked right into one of the most dangerous places on earth. The Chambal Valley was completely overrun by heavily armed dacoits, basically bandits. The government strategy was exactly what you'd expect, strictly legal and militaristic, guns, arrests, and escalating violence. But then, Vinoba gets a letter from a notorious dacoit sitting on death row, asking for a blessing. So Vinoba travels into the valley with his entirely different approach, known as Hridiya Parivartan, or a change of heart. He sat down with these bandits and told them, look, nobody is born a criminal, and he urged them to renounce violence through compassion, not because they were terrified of the police. And no way, it actually worked. Over 20 incredibly dreaded, heavily armed dacoits literally walked out of the ravines and voluntarily handed their weapons over to him. Now, we gotta be clear here, he wasn't handing out free passes. There was zero amnesty from the law. These guys surrendered knowing full well they were going to face the judiciary and serve hard jail time. But they chose to lay down their arms and face justice voluntarily, all because they trusted his message of spiritual redemption. Let's transition to Section 5, Criticisms and Modern Controversies, the Complications of a Legacy. A good explainer has to look at all sides. First, let's look at the pushback against the Bhoodan movement. Modern scholars and economists pointed out that while Bhoodan was morally beautiful, practically, it was pretty flawed. They argued that taking massive, highly efficient farms and carving them up into millions of tiny, fragmented pieces for individual families was terrible for large-scale agricultural output. Vinoba's response to this economic critique was poetic, though obviously very debated. He simply stated, I prefer fragmented land to fragmented hearts. For him, prioritizing social harmony and human dignity was absolutely crucial, way more important than sheer economic efficiency. But the controversies definitely didn't stop at farming. His most heavily criticized move came in 1975 when Prime Minister Indira Gandhi imposed the emergency, which suspended democratic rights. While tons of freedom fighters were being thrown in jail, Bhave took a vow of silence. And very controversially, he labeled the emergency Anushana Parva, which translates to a time for discipline. You can imagine this deeply alienated pro-democracy activists. The famous author V.S. Naipaul went in hard, critiquing Bhave for lacking rationality and basically accusing him of just imitating Mahatma Gandhi without any of Gandhi's political smarts. Political opponents even started mocking him with a derogatory term, calling him a Sarkari Sant, which means a government saint, heavily implying he'd just become a tool for the ruling establishment. Finally, Section 6, a 5-point legacy summary, synthesizing the impact. Let's see how this builds into his final years. One of the most beautiful shifts in his later life was moving away from narrow nationalism. While the popular national slogan was Jai Hind, meaning victory to India, Bhave started popularizing Jai Jagat, victory to the world. He truly believed that real peace meant seeing all of humanity as one single family, where the victory of one nation shouldn't ever require the defeat of another. He held onto this worldview right up until he passed away in 1982 by Samadhi Maran, voluntarily giving up food and medicine at the age of 87. So let's tie this whole shebang together with 5 key takeaways. 1, he was the recognized spiritual successor to Mahatma Gandhi, embodying extreme personal discipline. 2, he pioneered the Bhoodan movement, pulling off an unprecedented, bloodless land reform. 3, his Jai Jagat vision made him a massive advocate for global unity. 4, he was a prolific scholar democratizing deep spiritual texts like the Gita for the masses. And 5, his legacy is permanently complicated by his controversial political stances, especially around the 1975 emergency. Despite the critiques, his massive contributions were recognized globally. He was the very first recipient of the Raman Magsaysay Award, and India posthumously awarded him the Bharat Ratna, its highest civilian honor. Which leaves us with this final thought. We live in an era today that relies so heavily on strict legal enforcement, economic metrics, and, let's be honest, state force to solve our problems. But Mahatma proved, even if just for a moment in history, that radical wealth redistribution and the surrender of violent criminals could be achieved simply by appealing to human compassion. So ask yourself, in our highly polarized modern world, Is a genuine change of heart still a viable strategy for real social change? Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating life with me today on The Explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.